explain to us what you just filed and what is the reason behind that? What is the process and probably the why the ASEAN should act or respond about this seriously? Thank you.
I will just read from a section of what we filed today with the ASEAN, so it's clear what we wanted the ASEAN to do. And Gilbert will explain the very heart of the action, what's happening in Myanmar, the act of the Tatmadaw against the people of Myanmar. So let me read this, and with the note that the applicant cannot join us personally for security reasons, but he will be joining us via Zoom, and he will be talking also briefly, and you can ask him a question. So let me read now from the section of our application filed with the ASEAN Secretariat as well as the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. This application is filed on behalf of Mr. Salai Zhao Kling. He serves as the Deputy Executive Director of Chin Human Rights Organization, or CHRO, where he has spent 2.5 decades working for human rights and religious freedom in Myanmar. CHRO is a non-governmental organization in special consultative status with the UN Economic and Social Council since 2018. CHRO works to protect and promote human rights through monitoring, documentation, education, and advocacy on behalf of indigenous Chin people and other oppressed and marginalized communities in Myanmar. A native of Chin State, Mr. Salai Zhao Kling recently gave testimony about the Tatmadaw's atrocities against the people of his native country before the International Parliamentary Inquiry on Myanmar. He brings this application in light of the war crimes, crimes against humanity, and gross human rights violations being committed against the people of Myanmar by the Tatmadaw through its Four Cuts military strategy, essentially a horribly inhumane tactic to defeat the political opposition and rising insurgencies against the military regime by attacking the civilian populace and depopulating areas not in the military regime's control. In summary, under the Charter of the ASEAN, this application seeks of the ASEAN and its Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights the following relief. First, to declare Myanmar to be in violation of its international obligation to protect human rights and fundamental freedoms in the territory of Myanmar. Second, to urgently call on the Myanmar junta and its military to immediately cease and desist from committing gross human rights violations and war crimes committed in the territory of Myanmar. Third, to urgently call on the junta and the Tatmadaw to, under applicable rules of international law, to provide adequate reparations and satisfaction to the victims of gross human rights violations and war crimes committed in the territory of Myanmar. Third, to establish a fact-finding mission to Myanmar to investigate the gross human rights violations and war crimes committed in the territory of Myanmar. Fifth, to establish a regional tribunal for the prosecution of war crimes and other international crimes committed in Myanmar from the 1st of February 2021. And finally, to implement an effective and functioning individual complaints mechanism in the ASEAN system that is consistent with international human rights law and standards in order to effectively protect human rights and fundamental freedoms and to prevent gross human rights violations and war crimes from occurring, not just in Myanmar, but anywhere in the ASEAN region. And on that note, I would like to turn over the floor to my colleague, Gilbert Andres.
Good morning. Our applicant, Salai Zhao, filed this application before the ASEAN and the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, based on the premise that the situation in Myanmar is not only gross human rights violations that affect Myanmar, it affects the whole region of ASEAN. Therefore, ASEAN and ISHAR should give a regional solution against the gross human rights violations, the war crimes, and the crimes against humanity that has been committed and is still being committed right now against the civilian population of Myanmar. This is because of the four-cut strategy that the junta and the Tatmadaw has enforced since the coup last February 1, 2021. In fact, the four-cut strategy is literally a policy of waging war against the civilian population of Myanmar. Hence, gross human rights violations, war crimes, and crimes against humanity are being committed even until now. Therefore, ASEAN and IHR should give a regional solution, should actually declare that Myanmar is in violation of its treaty obligations under the ASEAN Charter, under the ASEAN Declaration of Human Rights, and even against the UN Charter. Now, what is this four-cut strategies? Well, basically, it's number one, it's actually intentionally bombing and intentionally shelling civilian populations. So the UN Human Rights Commission on Human Rights has actually extensively reported in 2021, 2022, and 2023 that the military authority of Myanmar has been intentionally targeting civilians through airstrikes and artillery shells. Secondly, the military authority of Myanmar has been intentionally burning civilian structures such as houses and even churches and food stores. In fact, according to the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights, in the June 2023 report, there are at least 60,000 reported structures, civilian structures that have been burned. Third, the military authorities are intentionally depriving the civilian population of humanitarian aid, even in the time of Cyclone Mocha, last May of 2023. Hence, this is really an intentional policy to starve and to make the civilian population of Myanmar suffer. Now, last Tuesday, we just celebrated, I think, the 56th anniversary of ASEAN. And we are supposedly an ASEAN community. Now, we should make that a reality for the ASEAN and the IHR to take the lead and call on the Tatmadaw and the junta to stop all of these gross human rights violations, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. And also, to set up a regional tribunal to try the military authorities of Myanmar for the war crimes and crimes against humanity that they have committed. And third, we also ask ASEAN and the IHR to send a fact-finding mission, a country visit mission in the territory of Myanmar. Because in fact, even President Widodo has stated during the ASEAN Summit last May 2023 that the 5-point consensus is not working. Hence, if it's not working, then they should find a relevant solution, a working solution to the tragedy of Myanmar, which is not only affecting Myanmar, it's affecting the whole region. In fact, there are at least 150,000 refugees in Malaysia. And I acknowledge that there are also at least 1,000 refugees in Aceh, here in Indonesia, because of what is happening in Myanmar. Therefore, we need a regional solution, and we need it right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gilbert and Rommel. That's very strong reasons and very concrete petitions that you asked to the ASEANs, and it is because of the Myanmar itself combating, like waging war against civilians, and it affects the whole regions of ASEAN. Jadi seperti penjelasan Rommel dan Gilbert tadi, teman-teman, saat ini situasinya Myanmar sudah rejim juntanya memerangi warga sipilnya. Bahkan fasilitas publik itu dihancurkan, sumur dirusak, dan seterusnya. 60.000 lebih orang itu fasilitas terdampak, dan 3.000 orang ini di press release disampaikan lebih dibunuh, dan 1,5 juta orang menjadi pengungsi lokal, dan ada juga pengungsi ke berbagai negara gitu. And probably we need to get a statement a little bit from Zauk for the reasons Zauk as a civilian of Myanmar, civil society organization leader, why you are filing these communications and this very I think, unprecedented request to ASEAN that never happened before. Zauk, can you join us? Okay. Zauk? I think probably because of the technical problem. Zauk. Okay, your microphone still in mute. You have to unmute Zauk. Zauk talking from somewhere because of the security reasons. Okay. Okay, Zauk. Can you open your camera and unmute your microphone? Okay, while waiting for Zauk, we probably, we can have another comments and remarks from Ms. Bivitri, who has extensively involved prior to one of the litigations and legal actions in Indonesia to seek relief for Myanmar situations. And please, Ms. Bivitri, give us a...
Okay, thank you. My name is Bivitri Susanti. I'm from Indonesia Jentera School of Law. As Gifar said before, I involved in this issue because I was in the group for submitting a petition to Indonesian Constitutional Court in order to open up an opportunity for Indonesia to actually examine the case in Myanmar here in Indonesia, because we have recognized universal jurisdiction for human rights issues that are already legislated in Indonesia. But unfortunately, it is in our new criminal code, which is only applicable 3 years from now. So in our prevailing criminal code, we don't have such provision, but we do have a provision that is related to that in our Human Rights Court law. And that's what we brought to the Constitutional Court. We want Indonesia to contribute to provide solution for this issue. Unfortunately, sadly, we lost the case in the Indonesian Constitutional Court. And although I must say that we did our best effort, because we even provided 4 experts in this matter, including myself, but we have strongly 3 international human rights law experts, from different universities outside Indonesia to testify before the court. And 1 witness from Myanmar to strengthen our case before the judges. But unfortunately, we lost the case, and for many reasons. But I must say that we predict that there is some kind of unwillingness for the Indonesian government to involve in this matter in an ASEAN member country. So, and this has been always our criticism, to ASEAN member countries, but we see ourselves as ASEAN civil society who have to do something to, give solution to the human rights violations, gross human rights violations that has been happening even as we speak now. This is human rights issues. This is humanity. It's not about diplomacy. So we join again with our civil society colleagues here, to submit the letter to ASEAN so that we have the Asian regional solution as my colleagues already presented before, so I won't repeat that. But again, I do hope that the international media can really amplify this issue because again, this is something that we have to join. We have to join the force all together because the very gross human rights violation, is really happening as we speak now. It's really sad, and we cannot just stay quiet as the member of the ASEAN civil society. I think that's my brief comment, so we can have further discussion. Thank you, Gifar.
Just a little bit questions, Ms. Bivitri. So actually, Rommel and Andres, as they draft these applications, communications, they said that they are sitting the constitutional court considerations that since Indonesia don't want to have the universal jurisdictions, and the constitutional court consideration suggests that the regional forum must do it. And what do you think is, and what is the constitutional law explanations of that?
Yeah, well, in my opinion, of course, the legal reasoning from the Indonesian Constitutional Court is something that everyone, including the people who are sitting in the ASEAN Secretariat, have to adhere, because that's like, how do we call it? We call it judicial order in the legal reasoning of Constitutional Court decision. So in reading the decision, of course, we cannot only see the decision itself. In Indonesian, we would call it amar putusan, because the decision itself only states whatever is petitioned by the petitioners. But we really have to read the arguments for the Constitutional Court justices, because in our opinion, they still want to Indonesia to contribute to the human rights violation solution, but they see that there are some legal impediments in Indonesian legal system, so they suggest something else. And that's what the ASEAN Secretariat, especially people related to Indonesian law, have to adhere and therefore have to push for the regional mechanism to happen, to take place.
Thank you, Ms. Fitri. Very clear, and that's also included in the communications from Rommel and Andres. Zalai, probably you can move to Zalai to give a little bit statement for us. Okay, Zalai, can you hear us? Okay, Zalai talking from some locations. Yeah, it's in the YouTube. Okay, Zalai, so can you give us a little bit statement about why do you finally choose to file these communications with Rommel and Andres and ASEAN lawyers with some support, obviously, from some organizations. So what are the reasons, and why do you think this is like probably last resort or something very important? Can you explain it to us? And what are your message to the ASEAN countries in this matter? Thank you.
Is past is another day that people are suffering more, and there's no remedy either for those whose rights are being violated on a daily basis. And and the international community is reliant on ASEAN to take the lead in solving the crisis in Burma. And we thought it's important that ASEAN as a regional body has a unique responsibility to protect human rights and fundamental freedoms of one of its member states, the Burmese people. And we look to ASEAN to do something effective. What they have done so far has not addressed the root cause of the problem or encourage. They haven't done enough to encourage the military regime from engaging in heinous crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and we are seeing every day that more and more people are being displaced. People are being forced to live in a situation where they have to be afraid all the time from airstrikes, from ground assault, from arson, and all sorts of unimaginable rights violations. And if we look at the number of deaths, it's on the increase. More people are being displaced across the country, and nothing is being done about it. So we believe that ASEAN and ICHAR could step in as is as is expected by the international community, because the UN and other countries, individual countries, are also deferring everything to ASEAN. So ASEAN has a unique responsibility to protect human rights and fundamental freedoms of the Burmese people. And that's why we thought it's very urgent that ASEAN start doing something meaningful so that the people of Burma can have some relief, and that the support needed to protect themselves, and for them to survive each day is being met. And those are the main reason why we thought that ASEAN should do something about it, and we look to ASEAN for that kind of initiative.
Okay, thank you, Zauk. So the effort from the international community and also the other independent fact-finding missions is they refer to ASEAN, so that's why ASEAN has to act as a regional, organization that have mandates, and the people of Myanmar are really hoping that this will give relief for Myanmar people. And in fact, the fact-finding missions has never carried by ASEAN before in this matter, right? So we have a word from Zauk that really hoping ASEAN will address this very urgently and seriously. And we also have here a speaker, the responder from worker organizations, building and woodworker, Mr. Kamit Istakhori. Since we already listened to the statement of the applicants, the lawyers, and the expert and academic, we would like to have your remarks on this, Mr. Kamit. Do you support this, or do you think this is important or not?
Okay, thank you. My name is Hamid Istakhori from BWI, Building at Woodworker international global union. We work, organize the worker around the world from the building material, construction, and also woodworker. BWA Global Union also part of the Council of Global Union. There are around 12 global union and based in Geneva and UK. We issued the strong statement in February in this year when we celebrate the 2 years of conflict in Myanmar. Also in Indonesia, we have many global union affiliates, and we discuss about the situation in Myanmar. Also, we had several discussions with the Indonesian labor movement, also the civil society in Indonesia, and YLBHI, Kontras, and also Amnesty International. In March this year, also we have a big meeting with APHR in the Indonesian Parliament building in Jakarta. We discussed about the situation in Myanmar, also the labor situation there, also the leader union of more of the leader union in Myanmar situation. BWA also went to the border of the Myanmar and Thailand, and we met with the leader, also with the worker. They have to go to from Myanmar to Thailand, also to Cambodia and the other. No, mostly they have go to German, also to New Zealand, and they complain about the situation there. Also in this year, we have the International Labour Conference in Geneva. We have the strong recommendation to ban Myanmar government, junta military. We ban from the ILO event. All of ILO event, they cannot come to the ILO event. Also, last month, 18 to 21st July, we met with the Indonesian government. First, we met with the Yasona Lawli, Human Rights and Law Ministry in Indonesia. We discussed about the situation in Myanmar, and we pushed the Indonesian government to take the strong action, because Indonesia is now as the ASEAN chairman in this year. Also, the one day after, also we met with Mr. Mahfud MD, Coordinator Ministry, to discuss about the situation there. Now, I will give the two strong recommendations from the global union to the Myanmar situation. First, we push Indonesia as the ASEAN chairman to recognize NUG as the representative government elected by the election in the Myanmar. Then, Indonesia has to take the big action, the serious action as the ASEAN chairman before take over the leadership of the ASEAN chairman to the Laos is in the next year. And in Indonesia, also after from Indonesia, we have two big moments in Malaysia. We met with the parliament member in Malaysia, also in Philippines. We met with Senator Raisa. Senator Raisa gave the strong recommendation, and they will support the only three big country in ASEAN: Indonesia, Malaysia, and Philippines. Gave the big pressure to the Myanmar government. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hamid. Actually, has extensive work to support this initiative, and also meeting with the government officials in Indonesia and other countries in ASEAN, and in the ILO meetings and activity in the future also bring the idea of providing justice to the Myanmar people. So we have questions to Mr. Zauk from the reporter, and my colleague Andres will give the questions to Zauk, but we need to hear the remarks from Mr. Madi from Indonesian's Alliance of Independent Journalists, that before we have collaborate with AJI to file petitions to Indonesian Constitutional Court, that AJI has legal standing to defend the journalists across Southeast Asia, and that's why AJI filed the petitions. And now, since the lawyers apparently filing the communications through ASEAN after that, and what are AJI remarks on this, Mr. Mahdi? Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. Yes, AJI has done a lot of works in Southeast Asia to promote democracy and freedom of press. And of course, we are supporting this petition to ASEAN Secretary General and to ITER, if I'm not mistaken. I think this petition filing to Ms. Yuyun, if I'm not mistaken, yeah. For AJI, democracies, we cannot, it's a must in Southeast Asia, so yeah, we support all of the journalists in Southeast Asia, especially now in Myanmar, to report all of news about Myanmar, because what we have now is only news from outside Myanmar. A lot of journalists has been still in detention there. I think from the last, maybe only foreign journalists was free from the jail. But yeah, so with your organization, with Temis, and also I think Mbak Bivitri, yeah, and also Amnesty International Indonesia, we filed a petition to do what Mbak Bivitri already said. So yeah, of course we support all kind of mechanism to give a freedom for Myanmar people and journalists over there. So yeah, of course we support that. But at the same time, as an Indonesian government lead the ASEAN for this year, we have problem like you said, sir, about the lack of what we said is a lack of like junta's military said after the meeting on leaders meeting on ASEAN Secretariat 2001 to 2021, 24 April. He said that, okay, we are going to do this on 5 pieces, but when he arrived in Naypyidaw, he said something else. Okay, we have another plan. So, yeah, I urge, or maybe AJI urge Indonesian government to review, or maybe, like you said, do something else to pressure the Myanmar junta to give another, what we call it, not another, but to free our fellow journalists and give a freedom to our fellow Myanmar people there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mahdi. So we'll probably go for the question from reporter to Zauk, and also some explanation from Andres.
Yes, we also want if the journalists here have any question to Zalay Zaok, because he's now available.
Sao, can you explain to our colleagues from media
how information could be obtained from what's happening inside Myanmar, because for now it's very difficult for the media to get first-hand information about what's happening in within Myanmar, within Burma. Did you get that, Saok? Yeah, so there was a question earlier about how difficult it is for foreign media to get first-hand information about what's happening inside Burma or Myanmar, because right now all the information comes from outside Myanmar or Burma. Can you explain how things are? How do we know what's really happening inside your native country? Did you get that?
Oh, okay.
But it only gets reported after we have been able to confirm and corroborate the information much later after the incident. So the scale of the atrocities and the suffering of the people is massive, and it's only worsening by the day, because it's all done under the cover of darkness, information blackout. So it's really urgent that something be done to stop these violations, because war crimes are being committed on a daily basis. Mass arson attacks, airstrikes, everything. So the situation is now quite untenable. And we are seeing more and more people fleeing across the international borders. And that is where ASEAN especially should be concerned about, because the source of the problem is the military regime. And thus far, they haven't been able to persuade General Min Aung Hlaing to change course. For example, if you look at the ASEAN 5-point consensus that was entered into agreement just a few months after the coup, Min Aung Hlaing himself agreed to those terms, all the 5 points. But what happens afterwards? He refused to comply with any of the points, and ASEAN has not been able to do anything effective to discourage Min Aung Hlaing from engaging in the crimes that he's engaged in since then. So the situation is really dire, and we can't afford to wait any longer.
Yes.
So something
Must be done.
that would be meaningful, that would provide remedy to the people of Burma who are suffering greatly from the military regime, must be initiated, among which, ASEAN should be very strong in its message to the military regime that they should refrain from further attacks and cease all violence. And that's where a fact-finding mission, for example, is so important, because what we have seen in the international press is only a tip of the iceberg, as I described earlier. So to understand the full extent of the devastation caused by the military coup and the subsequent clearance operations and all the all the atrocities, there needs to be a fact-finding on the ground, an impartial and independent fact-finding mission would establish the allegations that of war crimes and crimes against humanity.
Okay.
ASEAN has a unique responsibility.
Thank you.
To initiate such steps.
Okay.
And what's important is most important is political will. ASEAN needs to get their act together and see this crisis from the perspective of the ordinary Burmese people, because ASEAN, after all, claims to be people-centered. So they need to step in the shoes of people who are suffering in Myanmar, and see from that perspective. Then they would better understand the need for strong political will to carry out all these demands that we put forward, as well as first of all to stop all the violence, which is single-handedly meted out by the military junta.
Okay, so thank you. We have a little bit limited times available. So thank you for your explanation about what are really happening in Myanmar right now. I also heard that the junta arbitrarily extend their terms as the temporary administrator for the country. They call the State Administrative Council, probably, and they just extended beyond from what Constitution said. Probably we can receive the questions in the YouTube and email also. That we share the this press con and communications available in the web. We will provide you with that. For now, we need to end our press conference and media briefings. So it's better to have last closing statement from every speaker. Thank you. From Andes.
Just two short points. Number one, it's important that Indonesia is right now the chairman of the ASEAN. And we really hope that Indonesia will take note of the Constitutional Court decision that there's a need for a regional human rights mechanism, a human rights court that will deal with the war crimes and crimes against humanity being committed in Myanmar. Secondly, during the past days, I've been to Bandung, and I've heard a lot about the Bandung spirit. And in fact, in the final communique of the Bandung, it says full support of the fundamental principles of human rights as set forth in the Charter of the United Nations. As citizens of ASEAN, we're asking not less than what the Bandung Spirit has stated, and what the ASEAN Charter has stated, and what the ASEAN Declaration of Human Rights has stated, and what the UN Charter has stated. Terima kasih.
The ASEAN is almost 54 years old now. No? And everybody knows that the documents of the ASEAN all say that human rights is respected. But there are no effective mechanisms for redress when it comes to human rights violations. And we see that in the case of Myanmar and other parts of ASEAN. I think that that ASEAN can no longer keep on saying that human rights is important. It's there. We have an intergovernmental Human Rights Commission. But that commission has not really done more meaningful steps to protect fundamental freedoms. And I think that this is now the time. Now we are seeing what's happening in Myanmar, and ASEAN can no longer say we're a community when in fact that community is under siege. And that community is foolhardy. It's a lip service to the idea of a community where people actually enjoy fundamental freedoms, because we know that for so long we've been hearing all this talk about non-interference. And interference has not really helped the people of ASEAN experience what a meaningful life that has protection from human rights violations. So we would like the ASEAN to really take that up, and we know that in a month or so there's going to be a summit again in Indonesia by the ASEAN. We hope to hear from ASEAN before that summit happens, or during the summit. We would like the ASEAN summit, to actually address what we just brought before it this morning. And thank you very much for being here to hear what you would like to say about what we just did before the ASEAN Secretariat and the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. Thank you very much, and good morning.
Okay, short closing statement for me is let's all encourage Indonesia as the current presidency to the ASEAN to take a lead in order to enforce the judicial order from the Indonesian Constitutional Court. I remember when we were at school, probably we Indonesians have this similar experience, that Indonesian government is very proud that Indonesia was one of the strongest leaders to establish ASEAN 54 years ago. I think now it's about time for Indonesians, all of us, to be proud again, to be acknowledged later on, hopefully, as the strongest promoter of the better human rights mechanism in ASEAN. That's my closing statement. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, because of limited times for being here. So we stream this discussion, this conference to the Jakarta Nikus channel, and if someone missed this, you can share to them these questions. Thank you, Mbak Bibip. Thank you, Romel, Andres, Mas Mahdi, Bung Hamid. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. Good morning. Bapak Ibu yang ingin order kopi, minuman, snack ada?